of course, like we earlier said in our intro, that our first segment is going to talk about Al Alamein battle, a very important phase in the history of Egypt. Of course, Al Alamein is a town in northern Matruh Governorate in Egypt, and in that area, a very important phase in World War II took place, and exactly in the year 1942, and to shed more light on that battle and the repercussions and the reasons behind it, the situation, the whole situation. We're very delighted to be joined by Dr. Yousseif Mazhar, member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs. Good morning, Dr. Mazhar. How are you doing, sir?
Fine, thank you.
A very good morning to you, sir.
Same to you.
As my dear colleague Dina said, we are going to speak about this Alamein battle. But before we go into its details, Egypt, with its wonderful location, was all the time the place where, unfortunately, whether we were occupied by many foreign countries, or we were included or being involved into battles which we had nothing to do with them. And I think Al Alamein was one of those battles. Why the choice of Al Alamein in specific, as according to its geographical location? And it seems that whenever it's Egypt, so we were involved. True?
Yes and no. Okay, let's start at the main thing. Egypt is at the crossroads of many areas of the world. At that time, let's say during World War II, the main interest of the whole world and Great Britain at that time, now of course we talk about the UK, the main interest was the Middle East, but more interest was the route to India. So the allies, who were let's say the British and the Australians and New Zealanders and all this group who were present in this battle, the main idea was that Great Britain at that time was afraid of the Axis, which is the group of Germany plus Italy, etc., of getting to the Suez Canal and blocking the route to India. India was part of the whole British Empire, also the whole traffic, trade, etc. So whatever party could control Egypt or get into Egypt would not only control Egypt, but would control everything east of Suez. You remember they always talk about east of Suez. So that was the main interest of this confrontation between the Axis powers and the Allies. And when we talk this, just to remember the Axis is Germany and its
Allies.
Yes, and Italy, and the Allies were the whole of the British Empire, and there were Australians there, New Zealand, South Africans, everybody there. So the idea was, of course, the Rommel, very famous Rommel, often called the Desert Fox, was in charge of landing the German troops in the north of Africa, running through Tunisia, Morocco, and rushing towards Egypt, getting to reach Alexandria, then Cairo, then the Suez area, etc. Of course, that means that all the this armed forces of, well, let's keep telling them now they're the Axis, were running very quickly along. They reached Marsa Matruh. They went through Marsa Matruh, and the British at that time, plus the Allies, had to find a place to stop this onward march. So there were many attempts. There were many commanders of the British Army or the Allied Army, until we come to Montgomery. So when we talk today, we talk about two generals, really, Rommel and Montgomery. Now, as you know, the whole terrain of the North Coast is usually a route near the sea, where you can maneuver with tanks and with armored cars, etc. But into the sea, you have the sandy areas, and down into the deserts, you have very difficult terrain. So the whole battle used to be normally along these two routes, but of course Rommel living up to his name as the Desert Fox, was always thinking, let's go down south and get up behind the Allied army and get into and cut them off. So this is the thing. Now, everybody who talks about this battle forgets Egypt. Now, Egypt was part of this battle.
Yes.
Of course, as an Egyptian, when I talk about Alamein, I have to talk about also about the role of the Egyptian armed forces at that time. And if not, the Egyptian armed forces were there giving supplies, taking positions where the Allies had gone forward in the battle. All these positions were empty. So the Egyptian army is in charge of that. All the ammunition, the ambulances, the hospitalization, all this and the logistics was all taken over by Egypt in this battle. So before I go on about what happened in the battle, let us say what is left of the battle. I mean, for people to hear what we're talking about. The battle now is one of the best relics in the world. Number one, the Germans have got a beautiful building there to commemorate or to remember all the fallen Axis soldiers or the German soldiers. The British have got another graveyard, a large one. The Italians have got a very beautiful place. So this whole area, don't forget, I must talk about that not only as a military battle, but because they're building a new city there now, we must look at what have we got there. We've got one of the best areas for tourism in the world. At the moment, all these partners in this battle come once a year, and this was a few days ago, actually.
Yes.
And there was a meeting with our president. They commemorate or they remember this battle. So there are also the Greeks. There are also some Libyan soldiers who are with the Italians, also there. And the Greeks have got their own graveyard. Egyptians, of course, we don't use, we've got our family graveyards. But also part of this is in the official Egyptian army. Another thing that exists in this area is a beautiful museum, the Alamein Museum. It's a beautiful museum, and it's got...
it was renovated, by the way.
It was renovated, and it's been opened recently.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi had a tour when he was there to commemorate the 75th anniversary of Alamein.
Exactly. So when we talk about Alamein now, to jump just a bit forward, since we are in this, we have got a beautiful area. Apart from the fact that it is the start of the extension of the beautiful beaches of Egypt, etc., etc. But we must also talk about the new Alamein city, because the president went to El Alamein actually for all these reasons. I don't know what was the main motivation, but they're all valid. So there's a new city, the El Alamein city, and that idea is to have it as a breakthrough and to absorb the increasing population in this area. And also it will become a sort of capital for that part of the... and it is being built like the new Cairo city or the new administrative capital. By the way, they're going to change the name.
Okay.
They're going to call it something else now. But anyhow, so this El Alamein will be that. So now, let us look at the battle.
Right. Looking over the battle, if you allow me to get in here, how did El Alamein battle affect the history of Egypt?
Well, first of all, because the El Alamein battle was the turning point of World War II. That means World War II, it was being won by the German and Axis powers. They had taken France, they had taken all Europe, and they had moved over, and they were moving towards here. They could have taken North Africa. So it's very important that when they were stopped at El Alamein, there were two battles at Alamein, by the way, just to put in. When they were stopped the first time and the second time, and then forced to retreat, this meant that the World War II was not in the advantage of the Axis powers, Germany, but turned to the Allies and Britain, etc., etc. So from that moment of the end of the two battles at Alamein, everything went back And it went back all the way as it came. It went back into to Marsa Matruh, it was liberated, it went into Libya, it went into Tunisia, and it went over back into Dunkirk and the landing in Europe, and then the movement from France into etc. till they got back into Germany and the war in World War II in Germany. So why is it important? Because the war would have been completely different.
Yeah.
The end result would have been completely different. The Germans would have won, or the Axis group would have won the Second World War. So that's why it's so important. More important is, it is one of the biggest lessons in desert warfare. You know, in Europe, all the fighting is in green forests and etc. fields. Et this is desert warfare. It's a new technique. The armament is different. The tanks are different. The armored cars are different. The heat is very strong. Another thing is that it's one of the battles that the Air Force became a very big element in the battle. And the reason why Rommel was stopped was that he could not get any more his supplies of fuel, provisions, ammunition, etc., because of the Allied air forces. So there was a lot of Air Force work, and that showed the importance of the Air Force.
And socially, sir, in Egypt, the Egyptians were busy-minded with what was going on. As I remember well when I was watching, for example, some of the movies based on novels by the great late Naguib Mahfouz, whether زقاق المدق, the Alay al-Madaq, or the Bin al-Asrain. I mean, many of those films, in specific, speaking about how the Egyptians were reacting to what's going on and commenting on the tactics you've kindly mentioned, about the tactics of the Fox of the Desert, Rommel. And even people were thinking that if the Germans did it, so we are going to get rid of the British colonization.
Yes, that's true.
But others would say that, oh, yes, we are going to get rid of the British, but we are going to suffer under the Germans. How do you see this, or the reaction of the Egyptian people regarding this battle?
At that time, of course, there was a lot of propaganda from both sides, whether the Allies or the Axis force. From the Axis forces, of course, there was a lot of propaganda going. They even said Hitler was adopting the Islamic religion, and they called him once Hag Hitler. I mean, this is all not correct history, but it happened. So Egypt always got rid of its oppressors, always got rid. When you say it was occupied, I think Egypt was never occupied. It was passed over by, and the passover didn't even change anything. The Egyptians kept on living the same way, etc. And
keeping their identity.
Identity. The cultures remained. Some cultures, even back to in history, some cultures remained, but Egypt sort of kept on doing its...
we were all the time the melting pot.
Yes, exactly. So what I want to say that this battle was an extremely important battle. Also, I want to emphasize that America was drawn into this battle, even though it did not start, but because the Allies and Britain was having a very hard time, Americans decided to join the war against the Axis forces, and they started to supply and work all their factories in the United States started to produce armaments for Britain and the Allies. And you will see, if you go to these museums or read about the history, that a lot of the tanks and a lot of the equipment were American. And these were landed, and without this influence, I think the wars have been different. So if you want to study this conflict, you must study it from the way the tanks were used a lot in the desert, and this is something new for tanks, because tanks are heavy things and they can sink into the Germans used armored cars, which are also with tracks, and they can go very fast, but they're not as heavy as a tank. Alamein was a artillery battle, guns, and followed immediately by tank battles. So some of the biggest tank battles in the world, World War II, were in Alamein. So tank technology and tank battles developed a lot and are being taught in all the academies in the world, including, of course, our all Nasser Academia. But it is one of the battles that is very well documented for tactics, for equipment, etc. And when the Americans started to supply their tanks and their equipment, Germany was working 100% to produce new models. So the Americans brought in a Sherman tank. Americans always bring names of tanks moved by their let's say, generals. So Sherman was, the Germans had the Panzer. Panzer in German means armored car or armored tank. So the Panzer was being produced, and during the World War II, they started different models. And the factories in Germany were working 100%, trying
full capacity.
Well, of course, they could not throw all their armaments into Alamein because after that they got mixed up with Russia.
Right. You raised a very important point, which is documenting wars, important war. Alamein was a very well documented war. The Vietnam War was a very well documented war, and other wars, there were lessons taught. Nowadays, there are totally different types of wars, like the fourth generation wars. I mean, with all the lessons that we have learned, the world have learned from wars like Al-Alamein War and the Vietnam War and all those wars, yet these types of wars are not applied right now. I mean, other types of wars are showing up, replacing them. So how do you see the wars nowadays, and if you could compare it, do you see that we still have to be taking lessons from wars like Al-Alamein War when it comes to the United States, for example?
Yes, well, look, of course, at that time, World War II, there was a lot of spying going on, a lot of spies, there were lots of information. The information was given differently. There were no satellites at that time.
Yeah.
There was no GPS in that time. But there was radio.
Radio.
There was radio. So the war was fought with radio transmission. Even the messages, psychological messages, that Rommel is at the doors of Cairo, so that the British would be shaken by this news. This all was used on radio. So the human being in deception is the same human being, except his tools for deception
are different.
So deception at that time was, Germans had an Arab broadcasting, so, and it was heard, and this is, and they gave news. The Italians had also. So this is to demoralize the enemy. But look, lessons in tank warfare. Don't forget that Egypt had a very big tank battle in our confrontations with in the five-day war, so-called. And the biggest battles that we fought on the eastern desert with Israel were even larger in numbers than the battles in Alamein, let's say, in number of tanks. So tank warfare, it can be passed on, of course, with different things. Mini wars, macro wars will go into atomic. But mini wars or local wars will still depend on many of the elements of the basic setup of an army. Armored cars, tanks, all that sort of thing. Gunnery, artillery. In Alamein, when they started, how did the British push back the Germans? By a tremendous artillery barrage. It went then for 24 hours. When the Egyptian army crossed over the Suez Canal, with the Air Force, there was a tremendous battery of gunnery. So this, again, we say that here it was used, here it was used. So there are elements, the lessons can continue to be taken with slight adjustments, maybe.
According to the geographic location.
Geographic location, according by the level of our new technologies. That's correct.
We cannot skip speaking about the mines.
Yes.
and about the mines left till the moment in our desert.
Yeah.
And even there were calls that the Germans should pay the price for this, or should do their best to eliminate this part of their history in Egypt when it comes to those mines, and how till the moment those mines are depriving Egypt from using very big parts of our desert because of this.
Yes.
True?
Yes, true. Let us just correct the statement. Egypt, of course, has suffered terribly by the mines. At the beginning of the war, mine laying as a defense mechanism was very well organized.
Yeah.
Every army had to set up the mines, make charts, maps, etc. But when it got into chaos, when the Germans were forced to retreat, there was no time to, there was just, we're going back, let's lay our mines, you see. So the mapping of the mines starts to be loose. That's number one. Number two, you can put a mine in mud in Europe, it will stay there. With moving sands in Egypt, there is movement. Sometimes mines are bare, sometimes they move along with the sand dunes. So it's a different thing. Now, when Egypt asked for recompensation to clear up all these mines, they did not ask the Germans, they asked all the allies.
Yeah.
And they said, you devastated this area, you should take care of it. They reacted, but not, and I want to tell you something, the new routes that Egypt is building, you know, we're building a route now that goes to Daba directly.
Yes.
It bypasses many things. There are routes to Alamein, etc. There are routes to Marsa Matruh. This is all the Egyptian army that has cleared the mines. That was the Egyptian army. Now, there's another thing that is the result. The Arabs of the Western Desert are grazers. And mostly it's the young girls who take the sheep and the goats and graze with them. And of course, these are very young girls. And their sheep and goats go anywhere. And a goat can go over some of the mines and it will not explode. And then it's the human being of heavier weight that explodes the mine. So there's a very big problem we have in young people who have lost the limbs in the area. And what I want to say that the Battle of Alamein also went down south. They tried to go down. So even to the south of Alamein, where the Arab tribes are, Egyptian Arab tribes are, there are many casualties. And there are many NGOs who are trying to do. So the recompensation was also asked for this.
Right, so Dr. Yousseif Mazhar, member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs, would like to thank you very much for coming over.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
I hope now you forgot to ask about the new city of Alamein.
Hopefully.
And I can take half a minute, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the new city is very important because we mentioned it. We're just making 1-2 suggestions. There's no reason why we shouldn't bring the image of the Battle of Alamein into the new city also, so that it can be a new museum. It can be many other things to do. It can be the history of this area. So it's a very new city. It's a very important city. And it should also take part of our history. Don't forget, this area had Romans came through, the Greeks came through, Ptolemies came through. So this is an idea that we should just register that the new city should put our history also in.
Every inch of Egypt deserves to have a museum for.
Yes, correct, yes.
Well, Dr. Mazhar, thank you very much for being with us, sir. Have a very good day.
Thank you, thank you.
Well, right after the short break, we're going to be back, so stay tuned.